Hello there, and welcome to Gooner U Film Studies, where there are no degrees because the learning never stops. I'm Dove, an adjunct professor here in the Film Studies department, and my friend Keith is our stalwart distinguished professor of Arsenal and Football Studies. During our regular Gooner U episodes, we cover the past week's events in Arsenal, the Premier League, and other soccer topics, but during our Film Studies episodes, we discuss a film from the annals of soccer film history, and share insights about film, history, and our knowledge of the beautiful game. This week, we watched 2002's hit Bend It Like Beckham, which was wildly popular, at least for a soccer/football movie. I'd seen it, I think, technically when it was new, but have zero memory of it at all, and was pleasantly surprised. So, what do you think?
Yeah, full confession, I'd never actually seen it before, which it's interesting. You mentioned it being popular. I recall that title being popular. And like
Yes.
sort of as a title, as like a phrase being reused in various contexts. But yeah, I never actually like seen it. So this was a new and interesting thing. And I'm we'll talk about some bits and pieces of it. There's parts of it I think that look very different to me now here in 2024. As opposed to when I would, if I had watched it when it was out, 20 plus years ago.
Well, right. And it's funny, you mentioned the title. I mean, for me, I'm almost certain, and probably for a lot of Americans in the audience, it was our introduction to David Beckham, like as a person, like someone who I'd never really considered as someone who didn't watch soccer at the time.
Well, no, by that point, his introduction to most Americans was as the husband of one of the Spice Girls. So
yeah, that too.
that's how most Americans first heard of him. Let's be honest.
That's true. You remind me of something in the movie, though. That's funny. The mother of Keira Knightley's character, Jules, her mother at one point makes a comparison to the Spice Girls and saying, you notice Sporty One is the only one who doesn't have a husband, right? Like kind of telling her the direction she wants to push her daughter into. But she didn't point out, she didn't take it the next step and say, yeah, well, one of the other ones married like the guy who this movie is named after, and we'll make a brief cameo at the end.
Well, yeah, I mean, look, it's one thing to just drop the name of the title in the movie, which they did.
Yeah.
Drink. But okay. Yeah, I mean, like you can only lampshade so much, right?
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, it was actually funny too. So they had that reference early on, and then I noticed, and as mentioned in previous episodes of the show, I am a big fan of Britpop, including the Spice Girls and including their solo careers after the Spice Girls. But really, of all of them, Melanie C, Sporty Spice, is actually the only one who really had a lot of records after that. Like all the other ones had like one or two, which was kind of, I guess, expected of them. I don't know. But Melanie C actually had a bunch, and I like her. And she's actually my favorite of the original five. Like, I love her voice. And I noticed she had two songs that showed up on the soundtrack after she was called out by Jules's mom. So this
is an interesting difference between you and I, is that I don't think I actually knew that members of the Spice Girls had solo careers following the end of the group. So
you'd recognize a couple songs if I played you some.
Sure,
there are some that were hits, so you might. There's one at least that was by Emma Bunton, who I didn't know was her song until I went on a more recent journey through like listening to all these, like having Apple Music kind of suggest things in that genre to me. So.
I'm not saying you're wrong. I'm sure you're right. Yeah. I totally believe this, but yeah, listen, you're going to teach that class. Teach the soccer stuff. You can teach them.
Yeah. So as we've talked about with all the movies, pretty much except maybe Next Goal Wins that we've covered on the show so far, you could basically replace soccer with almost any other sport, and the movie would be more or less the same. I think it is part of the character of this movie in a different way, and definitely the outcome of, what happens in the sport has effects on the characters in the movie, but it's really about the interpersonal relationships between them, as is true with most movies. Most movies, like whatever it is, like it's not about blank. Like Star Wars is not about space travel or lasers or laser swords or things like that, right? It's about the characters, and everything else advances that goal when it's done right, when it's done well. But I think maybe this one possibly even more so.
Well, I mean, in a sense, no sports movie is really, as you said, is really about the sport itself. The sport is, the sport and the competition is a vehicle for exploring some other aspect of the human psyche. Boxing is famous for this because it's such a very individually contained sport. Baseball kind of gets a little bit into that. You will see some movies that become kind of cult classics within the sport because of, even though they're not really about the sport, the world they describe is something that's very familiar to people. And to me,
right.
the first example of this is Slapshot, which if you're a hockey person, you have to watch Slapshot. It's
right.
Even though the movie it's not really about hockey. It represents a world, like everyone in hockey has seen that movie and can quote it endlessly, which they should because it's hilarious. Not for kids, but. But yeah, this is obviously the sport as a metaphor or a window into other things that aren't really about the sport. And soccer, particularly because as we'll get into this, there's a sense of, the idea of Britishness and British identity, of which the footy plays an important role in that. But
yeah, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, the whole culture around the sport is a big part of the movie. So if we were to sound the spoiler horn before people go and decide, are they going to watch the movie or not if they haven't seen it before, does it get a thumbs up from you overall?
Yeah, I came away from it sort of broadly having enjoyed it. It was an enjoyable, what was it, 2 hours? Just under 2 hours, I think.
Yeah, roughly, yeah.
An enjoyable movie, largely done well. I know we both have some issues, concerns, which we'll get to, but I like it. It's one that there's nothing wrong with saying, yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and it has my recommendation too. So overall, if you haven't seen it, go watch it. It's streaming right now on Disney Plus and or Hulu. The line has become so blurry I can't tell what's on which most of the time anymore. But I watch it in Disney Plus, so it's if you have both, you can definitely watch it there. Either way, we'll be here. We'll come back, and I'm going to hit the spoiler horn. And we're back. So yeah, there wasn't any particular spoiler I had in mind, but you're forewarned if you stuck around through this point. So next question for you.
I mean, we've had this comment off the air. The thing about sports movies is they always kind of end the same way. Like, they're in the championship game. Well, yeah, that's kind of how they all work. Like, there's no spoiler to that part.
Just wait till I make my sports movie.
I mean, to be fair, what is widely recognized one of the greatest sports movies ever, Rocky. I mean, he actually does lose the final fight, which, right? I'm sorry, the movie was Best Picture in 1976. He loses at the end. This is not news to anybody.
No.
Sorry.
Spoilers for a different movie.
You should still watch Rocky. It's great. But anyway,
continuing the digression a little bit, he states in the movie his goal isn't to win the fight, and we haven't spoiled whether he actually accomplishes what his actual goal was of going the distance. So
I mean,
if you are in the mood to see Rocky, do a double feature, Rocky and Bend It Like Beckham. That'll be an interesting one.
There's a lot we could unpack with that, but we need to get back on track.
Back on track. Okay, crack the whip. All right. So, looking at the last few movies that we've done on the show, we had Next Goal Wins, which I would consider to kind of be a historical soccer drama. I mean, it's not like the deep past or anything, but it's depicting an actual event, or actually a historical soccer comedy. I had the order on my notes wrong. So yeah, Next Goal Wins, historical soccer comedy. United, historical soccer drama. And then, we had a couple youth soccer comedies, right? What genre would you call this movie? Like, I kind of had trouble because it's almost a dramedy. It's almost like equal parts, like serious stuff going on with some laughs, but it wasn't like I was laughing the whole time. It wasn't like that was the main goal of the movie,
Oh yeah, I mean, it definitely falls on the. I mean, if we think of it as this is where you as the film person, I'm sure, can define these terms better than I can. I think it falls definitely more on the drama side of the spectrum than the comedy one. There can be, good dramas have moments of levity. They have moments of lightness and jokes, but there was nothing in this that I thought was particularly like laugh out loud funny. There were some moments that broke the tension or could get a good chuckle. But it definitely leans more to that drama side. I think we talked about this, I think, with the youth movies, both of when we did Kicking and Screaming and Ladybugs, they're not really about the kids. They're actually about there were star vehicles for Will Ferrell and for Rodney Dangerfield. So it's really about the adults, and the kids are sort of peripheral. They're there in some ways to be the engines for the jokes they're going to tell. In this one, this is actually more about the youth. So there's an element of, and I'm blanking, I'm sure you tell me the term, the coming of age movie.
Bildungsroman, right? There's a sense, or how it's pronounced, yeah.
Yeah, the Bildungsroman, thank you. But the idea of their growth and development and how they are growing as people. Now, obviously, there's the assimilation elements, particularly for Jess, and how she's, trying sort of this bridge between this Indian culture and this British culture. And I'm sure there's a term for those kind of films, but now we're way outside my but she is also growing as a person as she goes through this. There's maturing in terms of expressing her desires, being confident about what she wants and who she is, and discovering her identity as, in this case, both Indian and British. So I think it's, in a sense, it really is, if we want to call it youth, and it's hard to call these people youth, because I would say they're picking late teens, I think, is what they're supposed to be. Yeah,
it becomes clear by the end when they're talking about getting into uni, right? Like graduating and going into university. They're supposed to probably be 18 in story. Yes,
in that age range. Yeah.
Yep.
Late teens, maybe 20. Certainly.
Yeah.
Well, actually, we should say they're probably at least 18 because, of course, they go to Germany and they drink, and they're in a public place in a bar. I don't know.
Is 18? I wouldn't be surprised if 16 or 17 was the drinking age. On the
continents, I mean, now I'll go look this up, but I suspect on the continents, yeah,
yeah, you have to know.
No, without adult supervision, it's 16. So. Well, no, that's again, this is the AI overview answer from Google. So, and again, it's been 20 years. Who knows if they change it? Without adult supervision, Germans can buy soft alcoholic beverages, wine and beer at 16. At 18, then without adult supervision, they can get distilled spirits and other alcoholic beverages.
Okay. What were they drinking? I don't remember.
Given they were in a club, so I assume it wasn't just like. And I mean, not to play too deeply into stereotypes, but we are dealing with a bunch of young women. I suspect they're not knocking back pints.
Although they are English, so you don't know. But
fair.
So okay, so yeah, but in that ballpark, like somewhere 16 to 18-ish, like somewhere around there. So you were saying about them being that age,
but because of their age, in some ways the age was distinguishing them from the other ones, and it's harder to do. I don't say it's definitely because of how different people are in that stretch of their lives. It's very hard to make a movie about kids when you're dealing with the ages that we saw in Ladybugs and Kicking and Screaming. It's not about them; it's about the adults. This is a movie where it really is about I was sort of making a joke about calling them kids. At that point, it's hard to really call them kids. I mean, even their coach is not depicted as being terribly older, which I don't have a problem with.
Is he or isn't he? We will talk about that.
Yes, his age is left aside. He's young. He is clearly not meant to be like, certainly not the age gap we're seeing with Rodney Dangerfield or Will Ferrell. He is obviously much closer to them in age.
Yes.
And so even then, he's not he's not an adult in the same way, right?
No, that's true.
We talk about the adults. The adults in the movie are their parents.
Well, yeah, exactly. And he, along with the two girls, like he is finding his way. Also, he has situations that he's dealing with his father, and it's all about parents.
I mean, I do think there's a bit of a criticism I have of the movie overall. It feels at times a little, especially in the first half, it felt a little overstuffed. Like it felt like there were almost just one too many plots going on at once. And I thought they resolved them in the second. So I ended up watching it in 2 parts. I had to watch an hour. I had to break, and it was the next day I watched the second half.
Okay.
I felt in the second half they kind of resolved some of that, but early on, for a moment, I was like, okay, it feels like there's a lot more going on than there needs to. But that was a personal complaint, and the coach's subplot I think was a little bit a part of that. And they played it okay. But
yeah, it's subtle. It's in the background.
Yeah, but those things started to layer up. You add in the sister, and you add in
I see what you're saying.
Jules, right? Her entire family setup, I think, was it was a lot going on, and
and Jess's friend, like who she may or may not be romantically involved with by the end, like all that. Yeah, that was. Yeah, I can see what you're saying. There's a little bit too much where you weren't necessarily sure where it was going, like what the main conflict was.
There was and without falling entirely into, well, that's not the movie I would have made. The response to which is always, "Well, make your own friggin' movie." I feel like there were a couple of ways. I had some random ideas throughout. There are ways you could cross the streams on this that would actually be effective and still accomplish some of what you're trying to do, but make the stories a little more interconnected. But we can dig into this as we go.
Yeah, so go ahead. What were some of those ideas?
We'll spoil some of my biggest complaint.
We blew the spoiler horn. Go wild.
No, the spoiler comes from our end. The biggest complaint I have about the movie is the relationship between the coach and Jess.
Mm-hmm.
And a lot of that, again, the difference between like ages and watching it as someone who is now even older than they are being depicted in the film, and who is someone who, as someone who is in a position of authority, I'm an educator. I teach at a college level. I teach students about that age. The relationship between the coach and the player was wildly inappropriate. Like, I have massive problems with that. And I realize you use the term a romantic comedy somewhere here, and I think there's elements of that in the story. Boy, I had some real issues with that. And I wonder if perhaps, again, I'm going to rewrite the whole movie here. I wonder if perhaps they could have brought the coach in romantically with the older sister.
That'd be an
which still
idea.
Gives you the cultural clashing, but gets rid of some of the. I realize that drives some of the. Listen, this is there are many strings attached to this, and it's an intricate story. And by doing that, you remove some of the conflict between Jess and Jules. But
it would be a different movie, definitely.
I had major problems with that again, and some of that speaks to my personal experience, not personal experience, but professional experience. Let me be clear about that. My professional experience about appropriateness, and it was hard for me to separate sort of that and the way the way they played through it. I found that unsatisfying. But that's also some degree a me problem. I'll fair.
Maybe. But so let's talk about this a little bit, because that was something that kind of rubbed me the wrong way too. And as I definitely described when we were talking about ladybugs in particular, I have to do training every year for all the sports that I coach, and there have been a few so far. I have to do training that's like abuse prevention and safe sport. There's like in the US, there's a safe sport code of conduct that you have to agree to participate or abide by or whatever. So we definitely saw in Ladybugs that one conversation that Rodney Dangerfield had with the one player was like, red flags all over the place, would never be okay today. And I can't speak to back then.
So what I'll say about that scene, because I know what we're talking about, where he's having the conversation with the little girl and, sort of talking about how pretty she is.
Or could be.
I think that's one of those that plays very differently to a 1992 audience than it does to a 2024 audience. I think also remember, because it's a comedy, the point is there for Rodney Dangerfield to get a few zingers in or a few clever lines, because that's that's the point. That doesn't come off. To me, at least, that doesn't come off as being particularly inappropriate. I understand why you might see it that way, and certainly but the comedy context kind of takes the edge off of it. There is no circumstance at any time where a coach-player relationship like that is appropriate. That has never been appropriate.
Right. Right.
And especially, and we'll touch on this, I imagine, at some point, when we start dealing with the place of women in the sports, like that adds an extra layer to it that makes me like I suspect people would again read that differently.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just kind of, I do think there's a distinction to me between those two things.
Right.
That's how that's me.
So that's one aspect, and that's basically the power imbalance of it is a big part of that, where even if they are the same age, it doesn't matter. There's a power imbalance. He could be younger and it would still be an issue because of the power imbalance. That's something that we're taught. Like you could have middle schooler helping with your like elementary school age players, and it could still be an issue, right?
Exactly.
But with that out of the way, how old are they supposed to be, right? Because that's a whole other dimension on this. They're, let's say, 17, 18. It seems like about how old they're supposed to be. Just how old is Joe, the coach, supposed to be? Because that definitely matters a lot, too. I mean, and it's also funny looking up the cast's age. So Jules, Keira Knightley, was 18 like when this movie came out. So she is basically the age that her character was supposed to be, which is rare and good for her. Like,
yeah. Well, I mean, like it's kind of one of those secrets that everyone knows, right? That people playing high schoolers and are in their 20s. Like none of these are really in high school.
Well, and that brings me to Jess. So Parminder Nagra, who played Jess, is 27 or was 27 years old at the time that this movie was made. Jonathan Rhys Meyers, playing Joe, was 26. So actually a year younger than the actress, right? But let's just take it at face value. Let's assume that he's playing his own age, because he easily could be, right?
Yeah, that would not, a 26-year-old kind of a injury, I don't want to say washout, but sort of an forced into injury retirement player. 26, I could see it.
Yeah. So a 26-year-old who's not a coach with these girls, trying to date them, kissing one of them, like, that's questionable on its own. And is not really addressed.
I mean, we could dive into I guess you could dive more deeply into it in terms of like, again, because in the US we tie this so much to like high school, and like if they had graduated high school, it's weird, but not quite as weird than if they were like still students, because the way we mark high school in American life, I don't know if that plays the same way in Britain.
Right.
And that might just be us culturally on the outside of this.
Yeah.
I have to say though, because I saw that you put that in our notes here, that you put the ages in. It tells you how much a haircut goes into it. Because Keira Knightley with the short hair, I would have guessed she was kind of early mid-20s, like you'd expect. I would not have guessed that actress was 27.
Yeah, that's nuts. She definitely didn't look like it. Like
a ponytail does a lot, man. I knew she was older, obviously, but that was not. That was a bit of a surprise.
Well, yeah. So related to their ages, though, this leads me to a key question involving the milieu of this movie. Right, this team. What was it? Harrier, I think it was, or something.
Harriers was their nickname. Oh my gosh, I was just looking at. So I looked up where they were. It was a neighborhood. It was a neighborhood in London. It's actually right next to your favorite and mine, Richmond, in terms of our favorite parts of London, at least for soccer.
Okay. But yeah, so this team that is the
Hounslow, that was it.
Okay, that's right. So the Hounslow Harriers, that's what it was. So what is that team? Like, what level is that team? Is that a youth team? Is this like they talk about, like, at the end of the movie, Joe saying he was offered the chance to stay with them and take them semi-pro or something. Like, is this like an academy team that isn't affiliated with a larger club, or maybe that is? Like, what is that club?
Well, so I mean, I'm guessing that's what it's supposed. I assume it's a fake club. I don't believe there's any team called Hounslow.
Right.
I could be wrong about that, and if so, I apologize to the good people of Hounslow FC or whatever they're called. But I what I suspect it is a lot of clubs, and Arsenal is at a professional level, does this at a much higher level than a lot of others will or can do. We always focus on the main team, right, the main club, but because they're clubs, they tend to have a lot of different teams at age groups, and also women's teams at different age groups. Now, you go back in time to the to the late 90s. I mean, even today, there are vastly fewer professional women's teams in England than there are professional men's teams. A lot of the women's teams, some of the women's teams, I shouldn't say a lot, some of the women's teams are independent. Some of them are connected to the club. We've talked about the Arsenal women. My guess is this is the women's club that's attached to this Hounslow, which again, I'm sure is fake. Again, hopefully for the good people of Hounslow. but attached to this club, Hounslow, which I looked up is right next to Heathrow Airport, which accounts in part
tracks. Yep.
And again, sort of setting the stage that this is the part of London you're in. I think there's class elements that play into this too.
Yeah.
But it's a lot of these women's clubs were basically volunteer, or they were recreational at most. He talks about taking them semi-pro. If you watch, I don't know, have you watched Welcome to Wrexham at all?
Not yet. It's
a documentary. Okay.
I'd like to at some point, but haven't committed to it yet.
They get into this a little bit because they spend some time with the Wrexham women who are moving up in the world of the Welsh leagues, and are at a level where they're a professional team, in the sense that and I'm pretty sure at least that they pay all of their players. Maybe they're semi-pro and that they pay most of them or some of them and not all of them. But they're competing in the top Welsh league, which has a few essentially professional teams, Swansea, Cardiff, clubs like that, and then a bunch of the semi-pro kind of. They may pay one or two of them, but even the Wrexham players have like quote unquote real jobs. They're not making a salary, drawing a real salary from playing the sport. And so in that sense, they're talking, like, you notice he talks about how much money they have or they don't have. One of the scenes he's there in the pub, doing the numbers on the calculator, because I'm guessing he's in charge of that women's team. Yeah. He's the guy. Sometimes he has assistants and sometimes he doesn't. But he's in charge of that team, and when he's in charge of the team, it's not just coaching them; it's making sure they have practice space, making sure they have the equipment. How much are they taking in ticket revenue? Are they paying for themselves? How much money do they have to draw directly from the club? So, you're at a period where the women's game in England is increasingly just sort of starting to professionalize more so. So, like, yeah, they're basically they're clearly you talk about going semi-pro. They're clearly an amateur side. Mm-hmm. They clearly has enough money to send them to Germany for a tournament. So they're not dead broke.
Well, right, and they had a shirt sponsor when they're playing.
Right. Although it wouldn't surprise me if that was it AXA, I think?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
Which is actually, it wouldn't surprise me if that is just a reprint of the clubs. Like, also, AXA sponsors somebody. Spurs? They sponsored somebody. They were the Premier League shirt sponsor.
That looks like the name of the Spurs sponsor, but I don't think it is it. But it does look like. So
yeah, theirs is different. Someone had AXA as their shirt sponsor, and I'm looking up Liverpool. Liverpool does.
Yeah, it's AIA. That's
Spurs. That's Spurs.
Switch out the middle letter. Yeah.
Now I'm looking up old Liverpool kits.
But yeah, so you think that they're sharing a sponsorship with the men's team, basically.
That is, I assume, part of what's that. If you were, again, part of this, this is a totally devoid of context. We live in an age where every movie has backstory to the backstory, right? That every character, everything. I'm sure at that level, like, they didn't even think much about it. They just kind of like, oh yeah, of course that's what it is. Why are you asking me about this? They didn't put that much thought into it, but of course it would have a shirt sponsor, probably just the men's team, because they're probably just repurposed men's shirts, to be honest. At least that's what it might have been for them by that point. Now, maybe they were more advanced, but they're clearly meant to be a team that's what we in the U.S., a step above what we in the U.S. would call recreational. They're they talked about this, right? The professional opportunities that existed, for women, and how they were much better in the United States. And that was true. that's where the better opportunities were. And that league they're talking about at that time, the WUSA, collapses shortly after the movie comes out.
Yeah, weeks later after it was released in the US. Yep.
But they do have some clips there where they show some of them, and they do drop a name of an English player who was actually playing in the league.
Right.
Played for Arsenal, actually. Played for the Arsenal ladies. So.
Yeah, cool. So I mean, at that time, what was the state of women's soccer like at a higher level? Like, was there, like, today we have, I guess it's the Women's Super League that the Arsenal women compete in? Like, what was there, if anything, in England at the time?
So the Women's Super League, and this is courtesy of our old friend Dr. Wikipedia, we were founded in 2010, so still fairly new. It replaced the FA Women's Premier League National Division, which shows up in like 91, 92. So it's been around for about a decade. Arsenal had won a couple titles by that point. Arsenal is one of the traditionally more successful women's teams. So, shout out our I was going to say our lads, but actually our ladies at this point, who remain one of the best teams in England and are on the, they're the only English team to ever win the Champions League. Women, we should add. But it's interesting. If you look at the history of soccer or, women's football in England, there was a period, now this was, in the earlier mid part of the 20th century, where the sport was banned for women. That they were really not allowed to play, and the FA would not sponsor or support them at all. Now, by this time, that's obviously gone away, but there's definitely there's a long-standing stigma, and some of them I think are recognizable. We touched on some of them with when looking at ladybugs, right? There's a stigma attached to women who play sports and the kind of women who play sports. And I mean, there's something to be said. I mean, again, I don't want to completely objectify them, but the team were very attractive women. And since we know, they were all at least 18, it's totally fine to say that. But they were all they make the comment, the guys go and watch them and they're all kind of hot. Yeah, you don't have to be. We'll play into the stereotypes here. You don't have to be a mannish woman, so to speak, to be an athlete. That's not that they can maintain, a certain amount of what we call femininity now. So, in terms of things that are being unpacked in the movie, yes, there's a lot of the cultural stuff, but even, that's kind of what Jules is going through, especially with her mom, right? As soon as she overhears the conversation, well, of course my daughter's a lesbian. It just kind of, of course she is. She plays sports. Well, she must be into women.
Right. She was predisposed to hear that and read that into that situation.
Yeah, that's how I read that character, and I think that's supposed to be, which is weird because I think her dad kind of is that way. Her dad's he's very encouraging, and mom kind of mocks her for treating her like their son, but it was interesting, again, sort of overstuffing the plot, I guess if you really wanted to take that story far, her dad would also be not as receptive because it's not what girls do, but they, because again the reaction from the Indian family was very cultural, right? They didn't want it had nothing to do with the proper role of women in Indian society. They didn't want them to be too British because those women reveal their bodies and do all of these non-Indian
which was
things.
Part of it. That was part of why she didn't want her doing sports at all, was because of revealing her legs and arms. Yeah.
Whereas the other hand, Jules' mother has no problem with her dressing. Right. I don't say provocatively, but certainly sporty. Dressing in. Yeah. Well, yeah. Well, she didn't like it was a sporty. She wanted it to be. She wanted her to be attractive to men.
Well, right. She wanted to stop dressing sporty, is what I was saying.
Exactly.
She dressed sporty, and yeah. Well, and then we find out at the end that she's not Lebanese.
Yeah.
After all. But yeah, so it's that is definitely the main thrust of this movie is what parents want for their kids versus what the kids want for themselves. Yeah. And ultimately, the parents kind of have to grow more than the kids in this story to kind of accept that what their kids want is okay. It's not bad for them, and it could possibly lead to a really good future, and they're better off going with it instead of resisting. But
yeah, and and again, it's that idea of, and again, I think it gets to that notion of growth. I mean, all the characters do essentially grow throughout the. It is one of those. I think by the time you get to the end, they're all and there's something to be said for that, right? That they actually do give depth to all of the characters. Nobody really comes off as kind of a one note joke. At least anybody who's in more than one scene. There are some characters who pop up for one scene, but you're supposed to that's the point, they're in the scene. But anybody who we actually meet in depth has real depth. It's not a stock character. It's not a cardboard cutout. He's not a punchline. You can see growth in all of them.
Yeah, so I don't know. As I'm thinking about it more and kind of replaying some of the plot threads in my head, I do think I would call this like a soccer rom-com. Like, I think it kind of is a romantic comedy. I think that the comedy elements, it's more like British humor, so maybe that's where it doesn't stick in my memory in the same way, because a lot of it's like low-key and subtle, but there are a lot of situations, like with the running gag about like the mom thinking that she's kissing a boy, and then the other Indian family think that she's thinking that she's kissing a boy, and thinking that she's kissing a boy is bad, versus the or Jules's mother thinking she's in a lesbian relationship. Like that that is like a big part of the movie that like actually drives plot in some cases. Like it's so I could make an argument for that. What did you think of Jules's father's attempt at explaining offsides to Jules's mother at the picnic table or patio table outside?
I mean, we have talked about this the entire time we've done the show. The offside rule is for some reason it is one of the hardest things in the world for people to wrap their minds around. It's weird. Once you watch it happen, it totally makes sense. Well, see, but like to articulate what exactly is going on and what exactly is the part that I was going to say illegal, it's a little strong, but the part that's against the rules, it's amazing how difficult it is to explain that in terms that can make sense to somebody without visual aids.
Well, yeah, and see, where I felt like this whole thing falls down, and where I was cracking up as soon as I could tell what he was doing, as soon as I saw him, he's like, okay, so this mustard is the keeper, and this ketchup is the defender. And like as soon as I heard him saying that, I knew what he was doing. And like, no, this is doomed to fail. As soon as you have to produce a mental mapping of what the different condiments are relative to each other, you don't have enough mental bandwidth left to think about what the actual rule is. Like a little diagram on a piece of paper with like, this is like D for defender, like, O for offense or whatever. Like anything else where you don't need to do that mental translation, I feel like would have been a better approach.
Well, remember, he's also speaking to a character. The mom clearly doesn't care about the sport at all. Like he's introducing the sport to her, and that's an important. I mean, also what I'd say is, if we're being super technical, he gets it wrong. Because remember, it's not the keeper; it's the last two. It's two defenders. We always presume the keeper.
Yes, what I would say is that's a simplifying assumption when you're explaining it initially to somebody, and you can later disclose the nuance of. So technically, it's actually not the last. It's the last defender, not the last player. But yeah. But yeah, so no, I thought the idea of doing it that way was funny, but I'd come up with better iconography if you're going to. Well,
but I also say is that's the joke. Of course, he has to explain offside. That's the joke. Like
It did its job. You're right. I laughed before he was even done explaining. So yeah, that's true. And the mother got it, to her credit, as a character. Yeah. So before we continue, I would like to take a quick break to thank our sponsor for this episode, who is Zencastr. Longtime listeners will know that we use Zencastr to record every episode. We have for a long, long time. I just open it up in Chrome, and then Keith does. We click record, and that's it. We've stuck with it for so long because it's so easy. As they say, it's now super easy to record a podcast with Zencastr. You just log in using your browser and start recording a high-quality podcast right away. You record studio-quality sound and up to 4K video with your guests. Feel a sense of zen knowing Zencastr's multi-layered backups ensure you always have your recordings in the highest quality, even if the connection is unstable. And it is an all-in-one solution, so if you've ever thought about podcasting before and gave up thinking you needed a lot of different tools and services, those days are over. With Zencastr's all-in-one podcasting platform, you can create your podcast all in one place and then distribute it to Spotify, Apple, and other major destinations. As Keith and I were noticing going to this episode, they've even made some changes, tried to make it a little bit easier to get joined in and recording with someone who's hosting the episode. So if that all sounds good to you, go to zencastr.com/pricing and use our code Gooner, and you'll get 30% off your first month of any Zencastr paid plan. I want you to have the same easy experience as we do for all our podcasting and content needs. It's time for you to share your story. As always, there will be a link in the description and show notes. So some other things that I wanted to touch on. Little minor question. Did you remember the scene at the wedding toward the end? So, the wedding's going on and they had the cameraman with, the 90s, it was 2002, it's still like the 90s era, like shoulder mounted, like video recording camera, right? And there was a scene like in the hallway near the bathrooms or something. I think it was the same hallway where Jess talked to her dad and her dad told her, like, if you come back looking happy, that's all I want. Like, get that frown off your face, go play, right? I think it was in that same hallway where that scene happened, where they were all like beating on the cameraman or something.
I did not. I do recall the moment you're talking about. I had no idea I admit at that point I had no idea what was going on.
That was strange. That must be some kind of, I don't want to say tradition, but common occurrence, perhaps, at an Indian wedding or something that we're not getting. I don't know.
I mean, I have attended an Indian wedding, at least part of one. It was a friend of mine got married. His wife is Indian, so part of the ceremony was Indian. I actually had to leave early, unfortunately, for a lot of reasons. But I don't recall it. I'm sure there was somebody with a camera there,
right?
I mean, this was recent enough. It was probably just an iPhone, but I don't know. I guess I recall that scene going on a lot longer than I expected. I kind of figured when it first came on, I figured it was just some part of like montage of things going on. Like, especially towards the end, they started to splice together the wedding and the game, and there was a lot of noise and movement and excitement. I thought it was just part of like the overall, all of chaos, this going on around you. But it kept going on you're right. It kept going on for a while. And at some point I was like, what is, like, I have waited, and I'm thinking, am I supposed to recognize these characters? I don't. Who are these? Like, I didn't recognize anybody. Nobody.
Right. Nobody wasn't anyone who we knew who was accosting the cameraman. Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't think so, but,
That was weird. One thing, while we're talking about that part of the movie, so the wedding, the climax, right? The wedding, the final for the soccer team. So you get to the moment where, okay, there's, I think it was a free kick, or was it a penalty kick? I don't remember.
Free kick, yeah.
So it was a free kick, and Jess is going to take it. And so we get to answer the question raised by the title of the movie. Will she be able to bend it like Beckham around the wall and get it into the goal? Right. Mm-hmm. And she's been practicing, and we get the sense that she will. They don't focus on it a lot. It's not like her driving goal is to like be able to do that, but it's something they mentioned. They show it. They show her practicing a couple times. But what struck me is really weird. And I wanted to find out if you thought this, if you noticed this. But so if you're picturing, so she's taken the kick, you've got the wall. Now, where the keeper was standing was behind the wall. From Jess's point of view, the keeper was all the way on the left-hand side of the goal. So that when Jess got it to bend minimally around the wall, it was in the open half of the net, where, to me, the keeper should have been in the first place. And I don't know why. To me, it would have been better dramatically and more realistic if you got her to really get some real bend, so it goes around the wall and all the way to the left side, where the keeper was where she was supposed to be, and even jumping couldn't get it, rather than not where, to my eyes, she was supposed to be, and jumping couldn't stop it.
So, in terms of like the scenes of the actual, I mean, they say one of the hardest things about a sports movie is getting the actual sport right. And there are some sports movies you can watch where the actual sport playing is terrible. Like, nobody looks like they know what they're doing. It's really kind of one of the ways you get around that is really choppy editing, a lot of weird camera angles, and they were doing that, especially later on. Like that final game, it was a mess. They were constantly chopping back and forth. I think. So, take every bit of analysis I'm about to do here with that grain of salt, that there's a lot of things that we're just going to miss in terms of angles and structure. So here's what I think was going on. I think the wall was being set up, and I think our visual angle is off on it to take away that corner. So the idea is to bend it, you need to be able to get that sort of wrapping around the wall, and the technique of that is difficult enough, especially at the angle. And if you're shooting on that side of the wall, it's likely just to fire way off into the side. So I think part of what they're trying to do, because the point of the wall is also to reduce the field of vision for the shooter. So it's almost part of what you're trying to do is kind of funnel the shooter to a certain location.
Right.
And I think what they're probably expecting, again, probably overanalyzing this, what we have, is that she's going to try to go over the wall and into the goal. So, in fact, the keeper is situated behind the wall because that's where she expects the ball to come. That's what I think is meant to be going on.
So she's expecting the typical over the wall or perhaps under the wall if you're counting on them jumping and they don't have someone lying down or whatever.
Well, that by the way, the lying down, that's a very modern, within the last, I don't recall seeing that maybe even 3 or 4 years ago. So, yeah, I mean, you're still in an age where a lot of especially in England, the tactical nuance is still fairly limited. So, you're in a heavy age of what was called Route 1 football, just punt it right up the middle. I mean, a team like Manchester United or Arsenal, part of their success lay in the fact they didn't do the things everyone else did. Arsenal in particular with a lot of, because this was filmed, 2001? So we're talking 3 years after, the famous headline, Arsenal wins the World Cup, because they had a handful of French players on the team that won the World Cup.
Oh, okay.
Some of that technical stuff was changing as you were bringing foreign players into the league more and more. I mean, they had been in for the Premier League, and the money involved in the Premier League is part of what begins the real major import of foreign players. But that the idea of kicking it under the wall is a very new thing. Okay, you have the kick. Of course, you're going to hoof it over the wall. That's what you do. I mean, right. So I think what's going on there is the idea that the only way she can hit the corner like that is if you did. I mean, and that was sort of Beckham's sort of. It's overplayed it works alliteratively, and it's a bit overplayed because of the movie's title. But one of his signature things was his ability to get bend on free kicks, even towards the end stage of his career. When he was, he couldn't run quite as much, he wasn't as fast as he had been as younger. His free kick ability was still considered fairly dangerous. It was one of the skills he had and why he could still play, even though he didn't do all the other things you needed him to do.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that makes sense.
Sort of your game modifies as you age.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great explanation. So something that reminded me of, though, so talking about the gameplay in this movie, and definitely I've seen a wide variety of approaches to that in the movies that we've seen so far, where, they kind of do their best in Next Goal Wins to show gameplay and to varying degrees of success. And it's mostly cogent, if not super skillful. United did not show any game action at all. You got a little bit of practice and that was it. Like this movie, and then you have like the Italians and the madcap, like crazy disjointed stuff going on and kicking and screaming. This movie, I felt like the games kind of lost me a little bit. In the practices, the drills they showed him doing, that made sense. Those are drills that you would expect him to do, stuff like that. It was interesting, though. I read that, first of all the players like on their team and on the teams that they played against were basically all professional players from that time period, just about, which was interesting.
Minus the actors.
Exactly, minus like the ones with lines. And apparently the trainer who was working with Keira Knightley and Parminder Nagra, who played Jess, the trainer who worked with them apparently told Keira Knightley that if she'd started training earlier, that she could have possibly had a career as I
have to say, and that's always the trick about actors playing athletes, do they look out of place? And I thought both of them they fit. Like I didn't watch them and think, there are some that are some they don't quite look right, and that's why you kind of limit the things they actually do. Or you notice they're the only ones in the shot when they're doing anything.
Yeah, exactly. Whatever you can do to reduce the number of variables, I guess, when you're shooting.
But in a sense, and I imagine you have some background on this. In a sense, like depicting athletic action is I understand it's a lot like a fight scene, in that it's very scripted, very coordinated,
right?
Requires a certain skill level. But imagine doing that coordination with 8 or 9 people. You're not going full 11 on 11, but even just 8 or 9 people that exist in any particular moment of the course of a game, like and that. So that's really what you're. So in a sense that like the TV movie, they're not going to touch that. They don't have the budget to do that kind of work.
Yeah, it's choreography. That's basically what it is. Whether you consider it closer to fight choreography or dance choreography, it's choreography. Yeah.
And one of the more interesting ones, again, pull on non-soccer movies, the movie Miracle, about the Miracle on Ice from about 2004, I think. It was
they had an interesting approach, yeah.
Well, yeah, they basically attempted to recreate the actual plays, and they did a pretty good job, Well, of course, it helped. Everyone they picked were hockey players who acted as opposed to actors who were hockey players.
Exactly. That's where I thought you were going, yeah. Yeah, they cast amateur hockey players, and that helps a lot when they know what they're doing. So you tell them, you give them a diagram of the plate you want them to do, and they have the skills to make it happen. Sure,
right? They know what it feels like to do that thing, and so but I think they certainly did not look in the course of the game look out of place, which is all you can really hope for in a sports movie.
Yeah, so no, overall that was good to me. Are you ready for some trivia?
Sure.
So I as I like doing, I like looking up all the little tidbits that I can learn and share with all you guys. So first of all, this was, believe it or not, the first ever Western-made film to air on television in North Korea. Of course, it's North Korea, and they edited 8 minutes out. I can't even guess it, where those 8 minutes came from, which specific parts they objected to, but.
Yeah, I don't know. That is interesting. I don't know.
That was just what? Okay, and I guess it just comes down to like how widely popular and broadly popular the movie was at that point.
Well, I think it's also a testament to how widely popular Beckham was. I mean, especially at that point, he really was sort of Ronaldo and Ronaldo before Ronaldo in that.
Right.
Kind of. He was that. He had that. And there's. I remember reading something. His wife did a lot to introduced him to. Because for most of these football guys, like you sort of saw with the coach there, like they play the sport their whole lives. Their education is questionable a bit. They're not stupid, but they kind of stopped going to school a while ago. And it's hard for them to picture a life without football, without the sport. And, with being married to a Spice Girl, Beckham is introduced to this entire new world of fashion and talent and stuff. But it gives him a platform that most soccer players don't traditionally get.
Right. And not just, let me just say also, not just a Spice Girl, Posh Spice was Victoria's Beckham. Like she's known, Posh, I understand is an English term for being like fashionable, right? Like that's what she was known for, was her style sense. So beyond just being a celebrity, it was also that too.
Right. Yeah. So.
Yeah. So speaking of the name, though, and drawing in audiences, it was interesting. Apparently, they were concerned when bringing it to the United States market that people wouldn't go and see it because we don't know who Beckham is. We don't know what Bending It is, right? This was the thought in the studios. And apparently, they ended up not being successful, but the studio execs or whoever was trying to get them to name it something like Move It Like Mia, referring to Mia Hamm, who was really popular at the time.
We just get about 30 seconds of actual they showed the highlight package of some the women, and she was sort of the centerpiece of that, which I thought was interesting.
It makes sense for the time. She was
notice they were Americans. They were showing they sort of name dropped an English player, but most of what they showed were Americans.
And for the women's game, that definitely makes sense. And I could say probably for myself in 2002, I had heard of Mia Hamm, and I don't think I had heard of really any other soccer players at that point. So there's something to that, but I'm glad they didn't change it.
Yeah, I mean, and that was I remember it was always sort of the joke when it came out. The movie's called Bend It Like Beckham, but Beckham's not actually in it. Which then I look at actually he does make an appearance at the end.
He does a cameo, yeah.
But his name is in there, but obviously it's not really about him at all.
Well, right.
Which is kind of a fascinating thing.
It's largely about Jess's obsession with him and wanting to be as good as him. But, well, so we didn't talk about the opening scene. What did you think of that opening scene where they showed the Manchester United match and superimposed Jess's face on one of the players?
I was kind of interested. So actually the thing I most noted is that when they opened, the guy calling the game is John Motson. Who is a longtime British commentator and also for a while was a commentator on FIFA video games.
Oh, okay.
So I've heard quite a lot of his. I heard his voice. Like, I know that guy. I've heard that before.
That's funny.
So that was. I thought that it was one of those, you watch a lot of it and you kind of think to yourself, obviously it looks like a movie from the 2000s, late 90s, early 2000s in terms of the definitional quality. But I thought the editing in was kind of like is actually rather seemeless. It came in and I was like, oh wait, no, that's
it looked good.
That's obviously.
Yeah, they Forrest Gumped her. I don't know exactly what techniques they used, but it was convincing. Yeah,
it was actually very well done.
That opening match apparently was Manchester United playing against RSC Anderlecht, I guess a Belgian team at Old Trafford.
One of the top Belgian teams.
Okay, I haven't heard of them before. Playing, this was a Champions League match. It was a group stage in September 2000, so pretty recent before the movie came out. It was more modern match. That was an interesting choice. I'm
about to say the reason you haven't heard of Anderlecht is because Arsenal has only recently returned to the Champions League.
Right.
Anderlecht is like with a top team in Belgium, and it was would regularly appear in the group stages. So Arsenal has played them. United would have played them. It was interesting as I watched it. I was like, all right, let's see if I can place this game. I heard them say Anderlecht. I saw the Champions League, but iconography around. I was like, all right,
it was also very interesting, apparently, to tie in Arsenal a little bit directly to this conversation. So we talked about, with the writer-director who made this movie, and this is definitely an independent movie. It was distributed by Fox Searchlight, their indie indie distributor or label or whatever you'd call it. And so it was a writer-director. She didn't have too much of a track record before this movie. And from what we can tell, her background is not in soccer. Like, she kind of picked up what she needed to tell the story she wanted to tell. And that probably explains some of the gaps in the backstory we were talking about earlier. But apparently...
Which, again, we overanalyzed the free kick scene. It could entirely be that she just didn't quite... that could be a part of that. I don't know.
It could just be a goof and not actually intentionally. Yeah, it's possible. So, but apparently her inspiration for this movie, the moment when she said to herself that like the seeds of the story started forming, she said in interviews she saw a telecast, and Ian Wright, who we talked about recently on the show because he's I forget if he designed the jerseys or they were a tribute to him for the Arsenal 24-25 away kits. But apparently she saw Ian Wright dressed in a Union Jack flag, and that made her think about the concept of Britishness. And that, I guess, in her mind, put it in conflict with Indianness or something, and football, and put all of it together. And that's where the idea for the movie came from. So that's an interesting connection, I read.
A good man, Wrighty, who did not make an appearance in the movie, unfortunately. But anyway, that's fine.
I was actually surprised when I saw Jonathan Rhys Meyers. When he showed up, I was like, oh, him. Like, I really know him from the movie Match Point. It was to me, in my mind, it's like the first modern Woody Allen movie. Like, he had kind of a gap between like the 90s and the 2000s. He was embroiled in some situations of his own along the lines of the story. But Match Point, he kind of...
At least leave that where it is.
Match Point, he came back. I don't remember. That might have been one that I saw a screening of at film school. I don't remember. But Jonathan Rhys Meyers is in that, and I liked him in that. That's a good movie. So seeing him here much younger, that was, I guess maybe not that much younger, a few years younger.
I'm not going to lie. When I first saw the name, I was like, wait, Salah from Indiana Jones is in this?
No, John Rhys Davies, right? Different Rhys, which I'm pretty sure it's pronounced Rhys. In my family, because we're huge Indiana Jones fans, I've always heard Rhys Davies, but I'm pretty sure, based on there being a character with that name in a show that I've watched in which they say the name and show it spelled out, I think it's Rhys. So I'm saying Rhys from now on, and hopefully this isn't another Jackie situation. But Jackie,
whatever it is, don't tell the elf.
You'll have to explain that one to me.
That's a Lord of the Rings reference. He's Gimli the dwarf.
Is he? Jonathan Rhys Meyers is?
Yeah, he's also the Ent, whose name the Treebeard, the tree, the Ent.
Oh, okay. I've seen 2 out of the 3 original movies, I think, and maybe only once. So that's a surprising gap in my movie-going history.
True confessions tonight. Wow, I did not see that coming.
So, but anyways, the character of Joe was originally written to be an Englishman, but apparently Jonathan Rhys Meyers, when he was auditioning, he improvised a line that ended up basically in the movie comparing the Irish struggles in British culture with what the Indians have gone through assimilating also. And I guess she liked the idea and wrote that into the story and just had him not put on an accent and just be Irish.
Well, yeah, I mean, he clearly, again, depends how well you recognize the accents. Obviously, he's very clearly Irish, and I think you're right. That is his real voice. An Irishman in England is treated a certain way, and I'm not saying necessarily that way today, but certainly, we don't always distinguish those differences because they're all just Europeans to us. But here in the U.S., but there's definitely. Yeah, I mean, it was interesting how they tried. I was a little worried they might sort of overdo that and again sort of just add another layer to the story. But I did think that was actually worked in fairly nicely.
Yeah, it was subtle. It was basically the one line, really.
Yeah, right.
It's appropriate. Yeah. So a couple questions that I still have that we didn't get to. So you mentioned that for a long time, FIFA barred women from any activity in soccer at all.
The FA.
Oh, the English FA, not FIFA.
England. This was not women in general.
Oh, so I misheard that. Okay.
So part of it was the FA wouldn't sanction women's games, and without the support of the FA, in the U.S., if the national governing body said we're not going to support it, there's always going to be a group of Americans who say, well, screw you, we're going to do it anyway.
Right.
Without the FA support, that takes a lot away from it. So there were a period where within England, they were not allowed to play, or there were so few opportunities, it effectively was banned. And it really kind of, it took a while for that to be the case. There are still people around, some of the older women who are in some of the higher levels of the game administratively talk about remembering the time when it was banned, or sort of the comeback. It was when they were.
Well, so my question though is not about the history so much as today. Is there a rule barring women from competing on men's teams? Is it strictly divided, or could a woman who chose to and a team who wanted to have her, could she play on a men's team? Is that something that's a possibility? Because it seemed to me as a potential career path for these 2 English girls in this movie, but I didn't know if that would be against the rules or regulations.
I'm going to guess that it's not a question anyone would have really thought of in the 1990s, because the idea of the problem with this idea with women competing on men's teams is never their technical ability, it's the size and speed and strength angle. I mean, they would get eaten alive by, especially in England, where, let's be honest, the lower levels are rough and tumble. That is a physical game. It would just be so difficult for them. It's so much the game is so much faster. I mean, the story comes up, and the U.S. women's team, one of the best in the world, regularly scrimmages against boys' high school teams because it's competitive. They've gotten blown out by some of them.
Right.
And again, the size and the speed of, we're talking 18-year-old boys, to say nothing of if they were to walk on the field with Arsenal with a bunch of, guys in their early 20s, it would be ugly. It would not go well. So the idea of a woman, I think, even theoretically, is it possible? I suppose. That there could be a woman who has the requisite physical abilities as well as the technical skill to do that. I suspect it was just so unlikely no one would have ever bothered with it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Nowadays, and we've had this conversation in other contexts, or with the talk about the last Next Goal Wins, right, about the transgender player. nowadays, because of that, I think you're starting to see increasingly, even for the men's side, increasingly they're starting to draw, okay, what are the rules about who is allowed to compete in what level? Typically, they're drawn the other way. No men in women's sports. You never had to say no women in men's sports because they wouldn't do it. But the line was about men and women's sports. And now I wonder, the idea of keeping women out of men's sports, and we can get into the definitions of that somewhere else. Like that idea of having to draw that line, I think is like a very recent, I think is probably much more recent.
I could see it going back to ladybugs.
Well, but that's men in women's sports. Those rules were always around.
Right.
It's the other way. Like, why, could a woman play for a men's team? I mean, theoretically, sure, but like, also, no.
Well, in sports, I know for baseball, because I'm on the administration side of, I see this, but like baseball is co-ed. Like within Little League, baseball is co-ed. Softball, where you're really expecting most girls to register, there is a boys division, but it is separate. You don't have co-ed teams. You can have a boys team or a girls team. They do not mix. Whereas baseball is co-ed, and if any girls want to compete, they can compete in a boys team, basically. A couple trivia points I wanted to mention I forgot to mention. So first of all, I found it interesting that the scar on Jess's leg is actually the actress's scar, and they wrote that into the story as a way, because obviously an audience, they didn't have the budget probably to cover over it and make it disappear. They weren't going to do that, and they worked into the story, and it worked out well. And that was something that the actress was actually concerned about. She thought she might not be able to get the role because of it. So that was nicely handled. Also, she went on in 2002 to beat out Ronaldo for FIFA Personality of the Year in 2002. So she was the first ever woman to get the honor. I thought that was interesting. Also, we've been talking about like how popular the movie was, and I pulled up the Box Office Mojo page filtered to the keyword for soccer. This is I guess a service that IMDb now owns. I think they predate the ownership, but anyways, so we've actually covered 3 out of the 5 movies in the top 5. Can you guess which 3 and in what order? They're at numbers 1, 3, and 5. So we didn't cover numbers 2 and 4 yet, but we covered 1, 3, and 5. Huh?
Sorry, I was looking. Something popped up, and I look at. So where is this list from? The top 5 of what?
Top grossing soccer movies, and I believe this is international, not strictly domestic. But
so because I'm pretty sure we have talked about it. That the Kicking and Screaming was actually made a lot of money. I'm gonna put that at number 1.
Yes, so that is correct. Kicking and Screaming was number 1. So number 3 and number 5 are on the board.
I would say 3 is Bend It Like Beckham.
Okay, 2 for 2. So which of the other movies that we've talked about? I guess that narrows it down a lot because there are only 3 other ones. Which of those do you think is number 5?
And the made-for-TV movie is definitely not it. I'm going to say Ladybugs. I'm going to say Ladybugs is I gotta say the other one is just too new, and I don't recall it getting a very wide. The other one, it's Rodney Dangerfield. He was big in '92, so yeah.
Yeah, although actually, now that I think about it, I think Next Goal Wins may have been Fox Searchlight, also actually, like Bennett, like Beckham was. But all right, so any closing thoughts on this before we say goodbye?
Overall enjoyable, fun little sort of trip back to the late '90s, early 2000s, that kind of era. In spite of some of the particular problems I had with the plot and the thickness of it, I thought it resolved a lot of it created a lot of problems and then resolved most of them fairly well. I think it was interesting. I enjoyed it, and I think other people would enjoy it too. I would recommend it.
Yeah. No, me too. So what would you say you liked most about it?
I think the thing I actually really, especially at the end, sort of taking it all in, that I appreciated or enjoyed the most was the way they brought Jess's father into the story and how he came around to accepting it. It wasn't a moment where he just sort of changed his mind. It was an accumulation of moments throughout, and how he's developing and changing. He doesn't immediately change. And again, it's a 2-hour runtime movie. We could argue this is a movie for 2 hours. And, but I think if you're going to go 2 hours, like you have time for your characters to grow and evolve and change, and not just change on a moment, but really evolve. And I thought him coming around, I think ended up being, to me, probably the more interesting, I don't want to say character arc, that's probably overstating it, but I found his development, I think, was probably ultimately one of my, in terms of how he comes around to all of it and deals with some of his own personal issues. I actually thought that was really well done. Yeah,
no, it's a good call. So what was your least favorite aspect?
It was the player-coach relationship. Gross, just not okay. I understand how they used it to drive personal conflict. I doubt that's what I would have said in 2002. But right now, where I'm sitting, everything about it that was not okay. Not okay.
Yeah. All right. So for me, my favorite thing, so honorable mention to the script and direction. Like, I felt like overall, the writer-director did a great job. It was a well-executed vision of the world through her eyes. It felt very authentic. That was all good. And that was almost going to be my best until I realized, I really liked the musical selections in this movie. And I'm going to overall say, because of my aforementioned love of British pop music, which featured heavily, although I will say they played She's a Lady at the very beginning of the movie, which is by a British artist, Tom Jones, and they played some cover of it that I didn't recognize, and that was kind of weird. But anyways, the music. Having two Melanie C songs, I don't know that I've ever heard one of her songs in a movie before at all. And it was, I like that. And she gets mentioned in the dialogue, like, what more could you ask for as a Spice Girls fan? So as far as the worst, I think you took the one that I was going to overall pick. Like, the handling of that whole relationship, the ambiguity over their ages, and all that. Like, that was, and the portrayal of it, like that he would do that he wouldn't control himself until after one of them is no longer on the team or something. Definitely agree with you. But
not one of them, either of them.
Either. Well, yeah, exactly.
Yeah, the fact they were teammates is not his problem. No. That's a different thing.
Yes, it's a separate concern. So I would say, although I appreciated the humor of it, the idea of using these abstract, not easily identifiable tokens to explain the offside rule, that is, I've explained it to people, and I think I've explained it successfully, and that is not how you do it. So I'm going to say the offside explanation.
That's a bit harsh.
It felt harsh coming out.
You've seen it given, but man, that's a bit harsh.
So yeah, I'm going to stick with that one. All right, well, thanks for joining us at Gooner U Film Studies. If you're watching on YouTube, you can also listen to our show on Apple, Spotify, and some other places. If you're only listening, try watching us on YouTube with the link in the show notes. Your homework for today is to comment on a video, either this one or a short. We post shorts every time from our episodes also. They're on Instagram as well as Threads and YouTube. And Twitter. That's still around, and I still call it Twitter. Thanks again to our sponsor, Zencastr. You can check out our description for links to everything we talk about, including our sponsor and our Instagram and Twitter pages. Again, my name is Dove, and you can find me on Twitter at Dove Frankel. With me, as always, is Keith, and you will soon be able to find him again in a pub watching Arsenal matches.
So go you Harriers.